Today let's talk about Games Workshop's FAQs for Warhammer 40k, and the backlash that I seem to see against them every time they release one. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics for a bit more of a discussion video, maybe just trying to explore the negative reactions a lot of people get with Games Workshop's FAQs, say in general why I think that they help a lot more than they hurt, and maybe talk a little about codexes and digital rules towards the end. So in general, the FAQs for Warhammer 40k have been something that's been fairly regular throughout 8th and 9th edition, though perhaps they've just tended to be a little bit scattergun as to what sort of things they release. There's quite a lot of them. Basically, there's a short supporting document for every single codex that Games Workshop releases, and some of them have far more content in than others. Particularly the older codexes tend to have gone through quite a few series of revisions. The Astra Militarum Codex that one's gone through absolutely loads, back from when they were originally nerfed when Guard was a really strong army at the start of 8th, and then changing a few times as 8th and 9th edition rules have progressed. I'll link the Warhammer community site down in the video description where you can find the FAQs if you want to read them for your given codex. In general, I think there's two different motivations for Games Workshop to publish FAQs. Firstly, either fixing any errors, misprints, or ambiguous wording in their codexes, and secondly for things that are more sort of game balance errata, often nerfing some of the strongest things in the game. The pattern for the rules clarifications and fixes tends to be that Games Workshop will publish an FAQ for each codex after it's released, and about 2 to 4 weeks after it comes out. Generally in these ones it tends to be more of a case of just clarifying rules. If there are two rules that are ambiguous, then maybe saying which way you play it, and usually they don't make too many game balance changes unless maybe just a rule is just not working as intended, and there's some sort of technical loophole that allows you to do something quite silly. Say for example the Abmech Taraxi Skystalkers, they could jump on and off the board each turn, basically appear, shoot and then disappear, and never give your opponent any chance to interact with them. That was something that was mercifully quickly patched out. Otherwise they also often issue errata and changes to rebalance the game. Usually these tend to more come in the form of things like chapter approved or big FAQs, though in the past when they have just obviously released a book that's far stronger than anything that came before it, they have been known to issue things a bit quicker than that. Say for example Iron Hands in 8th edition, or both Abmech and Drukhari in 9th, both of which attracted some nerfs fairly soon after the books dropped. Drukhari Raiders went up in points cost, so did Drazar, and Dark Technomancers got reined in, and for the Abmech the Iron Striders lost their core keyword. In general they tend to focus more on nerfing units than buffing units here, perhaps because it can ruin the game of 40k a bit less if just one unit is a bit underpowered, as opposed to one unit being grossly overpowered and loads of people start playing it because it's just blatantly stronger than other stuff. It seems that with this balanced data slate format that they've now promised, these updates might well come there rather than in individual fragmented FAQs. Apparently that's going to be released quarterly, and that should be able to hand out these sort of changes. Broadly, as I said, I am quite positive about FAQs. Clearing up any ambiguity is good in my book, as is taking some steps to preserve some sort of codex balance. Games Workshop's famously not all that great at it, so when they do occasionally step in to tone down the strongest things, that's usually good for any of the other codexes who have to contend with them. Still though, it does seem that whenever Games Workshop does release FAQs, there seems to be a fair bit of outpouring of annoyance against them, people expressing frustration on all sorts of different fronts. Perhaps one of the most common gripes is that it means that a book will no longer contain all the correct rules. It does mean that if you just bought a new shiny codex from Games Workshop, and then certain important things have been changed quite significantly, it means that you just can't read out the rules out of that book, and you'll need to reference the FAQs. It just really isn't all that great a feeling if you've paid a fair amount of money for what is supposed to be a quality product, and the typical complaint is that this kind of shows a lack of foresight or playtesting on Games Workshop's part. If they'd had enough people look over their codex beforehand and fully test all the interactions, then hopefully any bug fixes could have just been included at launch. It also doesn't really help with Games Workshop's rules bloat problem. 40k's already got a ton of rule sources going on, and adding PDFs to every single book doesn't really help all that much. I don't think that's maybe so bad for people who are highly invested in the game, but to more casual players, tracking down FAQs and keeping track of what Games Workshop has changed can potentially be a little bit frustrating. Another potential gripe is that units and armies might suddenly become a lot less strong after you've bought them. Say for example, after the Abmech book dropped, if you did just spend loads and loads of money on a new Abmech army, something that's really good in game, and then Games Workshop hits them with hefty points nerfs on almost all of their good units, I could imagine how that could be pretty annoying. It's perhaps just one of the reasons why chasing the meta like that can be really quite an expensive endeavour, and unless you're looking to spend loads of money and hobby time in 40k, it's usually a bit better to just expand slowly and gradually, and keep on building up models that you like, as well as just whatever happens to be the flavour of the month. I think in general, while it might be bad for any given army or unit that gets nerfed a bit, it is kind of good for the rest of the 40k game as a whole. I think maybe the biggest example of when this is done badly is when something goes from absolutely awesome and standout to completely useless and something you never want to take. I think that's when you get the most of the feels bad situations. I would say for the most part Games Workshop tends to do this quite well. Usually when they do nerf things in points, it generally gets them to more of a point of where the unit's still playable but not auto-include. But sometimes it can be a bit of a fine line between making that balance. For example, Drakari Witches going up from 10 points to 12 points seems like quite a small change, but I strongly suspect that that small points bump is going to mean that they're quite rarely played compared with before. The balance can be quite fine, particularly on fragile damage dealers like that. Finally, another gripe that I quite often see is on the timing of the FAQs, and it seems to me that Games Workshop kind of can't really win with that. Some people get annoyed if it's too soon, say if they literally just bought a book and then already things are changed, and other people get annoyed when they leave things too late and just say why didn't they fix that sooner, say issuing an FAQ the same day that the book was released so everyone knew what they were buying. In general, of those two extremes, I'd argue that if they are going to issue an FAQ, probably the sooner the better. That's generally going to lead to more people knowing what they're buying, though I guess that has to be balanced out between them getting more feedback and not just doing knee-jerk reactions for things that didn't actually need changes. Despite these very legitimate gripes, I thought I'd just share my own opinions why I on balance like the FAQs more than I dislike them, and I'm very happy if Games Workshop keeps on going the way they are, particularly with this new balanced data slate format. For the rules interactions, 40k is just a really complex game, perhaps more so just because of the sheer scale and variety of the rules out there, and there's quite a lot of capacity for various things combining in unexpected ways just within one codex, never mind when you include all the rest of them out there in the wild. Unless they just literally did release all the rules for free and got everyone to playtest them and try and find the weirdest and most niche combos, I'm kind of not too surprised a few bugs do slip through. I'd say a large selection of the FAQs are just purely to clarify very edge case scenarios, or things that were kind of obvious how they were meant to be played anyway, but just ensuring that any loopholes for certain rules lawyers are closed. That will vary a bit book to book though. If they're having to issue entire pages of FAQs every time they release a codex, that's pretty embarrassing, but I'm personally pretty tolerant of anything that's just a few small changes, ones that don't make too many major changes to the way the army plays as a whole. I think perhaps part of the reason I'm particularly happy to tolerate FAQs like this is that in previous editions they just didn't bother for a really long time, particularly in the 6th to 7th edition type era. They kind of just let problems sit. For example, I remember a psychic power, I think it was Psychic Scream or Psychic Shriek, that was a main rulebook power, and it was kind of ambiguous as to whether or not you needed to roll to hit for it. I think I saw internet polls on the matter that seems to be a 50-50 split. When they have slipped up and left something genuinely ambiguous, I'd far rather there be an answer that exists out there rather than just silence. And I kind of see the FAQs myself as just support that Games Workshop offers for the codex to guarantee to at least keep their rules playable through changing editions, and not just make rules entirely break because they've become obsolete. For example, in the transition from 8th to 9th, I thought they did quite well going through all their FAQs and updating certain wording that wouldn't work with the new 9th rules to reword it to make sure there was no ambiguity. In a similar vein, I've kind of already said why I'm a fan of balance updates. While some nerfs might be painful for the armies who actually suffer them, in general it's a big win for the game of 40k as a whole, as if you nerf the best stuff, then new combos get to shine through, and the weaker armies have more of a chance. Again, it's far preferable to the era where they were just completely lazy and didn't bother. I remember the Eldar Codex that brought the Wraith Knight, and they just seemed to deliberately undercost it by around about 100 points or so, and let that just sit as an undercosted unit, alongside other mechanics that could quite obviously break the game, such as invisible Death Stars, or the endless summoning circle that you could do with demons. I think their balanced data slates are quite a good idea for dealing with that kind of thing, and have got pretty good potential going forward, both handing out nerfs to the things that most need them, and also they seem to be a bit more favourable of handing out army-wide buffs to the armies that are struggling. In general, I think it looks like Games Workshop are just going to keep on doing these, and perhaps the most important thing is just to understand the system before you buy books and things. With each codex or major publication, you should expect an error-fixing FAQ sometime within the next month. Expect that things might change a little bit there, though usually not too significantly, and just in general in the game of 40k, you should generally expect the strongest units and combos to attract nerfs and balance changes, to hopefully try and keep the armies at least somewhat competitive against each other. Finally, the other major vent of frustration I often see on videos when I talk about FAQs is asking why Games Workshop just haven't implemented at least some manner of digital rules, things that can get updated remotely so you can still have all the rules in one place. Games Workshop is still sitting in a bit of a weird half-half world with this at the moment. To obtain the rules for your army, you still need to actually buy a physical hard copy codex book, and then that's supported by digital FAQs, and you can use it to unlock the rules on their Warhammer 40k app. But the app plus the FAQs don't really add up to equal the whole codex. It's far more easy to access the rules just literally from the codex book itself. In the past, they used to offer the opportunity to buy digital rules with electronic copies of their codexes that will be updated as FAQs change the game. In perhaps a bit of a strangely backwards move in this age of technology, they took those away towards the start of 8th edition. I'm going to guess that that was made as some kind of business decision, as they don't want to stop selling us fairly expensive hard copy codexes, which I'm sure will keep them a very solid stream of revenue coming, because they're kind of the perfect product that goes obsolete within a few years. I think a lot of people's frustration with the FAQ system, though, does seem to come with no sort of central digital rule set. If you could just have your codex on your smartphone or tablet, know that it's going to be updated with all of the FAQs as soon as they happen, and ideally have the rules and things searchable so you could find things quickly, then that would be really quite a nice consumer-friendly way of delivering the rules. I kind of feel like this is what they were trying to go for with the Warhammer 40k app, but currently whenever I hear feedback about it, it just doesn't really seem to be quite as reliable enough to be a codex substitute. While there remain a fair few errors and teething problems, it just means that you can't really rely on it in the same way as you can with the book plus the FAQ. I do quite like the way that it's searchable though, at least that does mean that accessing any one rule is quite quick. It really does amaze me that Games Workshop can't outperform websites like Warhampedia, which seems to be run entirely just by one guy over in Russia, and somehow that manages to be more reliable, more searchable and user-friendly than any of their official products. Genuinely, if they could just at least try and match the quality of that, I'm sure there'd be an enormous appetite for it. Easily accessible rules from an official source. So I know this video's been a fair amount of personal opinion. Please let me know yours down in the comments. I look forward to hearing your feedback on the FAQs and Errata, and whether you think they're good or bad for Warhammer 40k. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k stuff coming, with new content out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.